слова запрошую Дмитра Шимківа, заступник.
We begin our next briefing, and I invite Mr. Shymkiv, who's deputy head of presidential administration, who is responsible for reforms. Ladies and gentlemen, great to see you. Today I will touch the issues of reforms in the country. I will try to explain some status, and I will give you updates about reforms, and I will make announcements of the issues that we discuss at the National Council of Reforms. And so we continue our meetings from February 2, and the part of that meeting was moved for this Friday, February 13. During the next meeting of the National Council of Reforms, during the second part of the meeting, we will consider such issues as management of state enterprises and reforms in that sector, and donor conference, and digital Ukraine, and also some issues on monitoring of implementation of reforms. I would like to tell you that now initiated the new project with your commission, and that is monitoring of success of reforms, and also implementation of EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, and now we developed the monitoring of reforms project. The concept will be presented at the meeting of the National Council of Reforms, and at present we have a lot of criticism as to communication and how reforms are implemented, monitoring of status of those reforms we have in the country. So the approach of the monitoring component will allow us to understand what is happening to every concrete reform, and what tasks every team is facing. And also there are people who are responsible, the leaders of working groups. And as you know, we started to look for project managers for every reform. Now, about some reforms. Anti-corruption reform. On the 12th of January, the Competition Commission to find the head of National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and they announced the conditions and deadlines. And February 11th, that's the last day to send their documents, and all other up to midnight. So the post office, and until 17:45 could be brought to presidential administration. I give you these details for us not to have some kind of for you to understand that we are quite clear. There are about 100 documents already provided of competitors for that position. All the meetings of the competition committee are online. During the 3 days, they will give information on all the competitors, all who participate in the competition. And the commission must, all 9 members, they have enough of energy. They don't have no intention to delay, and they will offer 3 candidates to the president, and he will bring one of them to the Parliament of Ukraine. That's about anti-corruption status. E-governance. In January 2015, we finished United Nations Governance Survey, and it started in July 2014, and Ukraine is 88th or 87th. In 2010, we were the 54th. During these years, unfortunately, other countries improved their progress as to e-governance, and that's why the issue of e-democracy and the use of modern techniques is very important. We should consider. That's why there is a project, Digital Ukraine, and also legislative initiatives which allow to unblock the use of modern technologies by state authorities. One of the examples of such projects, and that is e-procurement, and the procedure was launched last week. We didn't see any. It's just working, and now we have some procurements and test, and on the 12th of February we'll inform all participants of the project how it works, and the next step will be successful work of software, and that it will be delivered to a responsible state authority. But the project has launched, and that's the result of work of, because of cooperation of state agencies, volunteers, and civic society. As to reforms of the state's public service, that was considered in the Cabinet of Ministers, and it's important that European Union and Transparency International, in their report on National Integrated Systems in 2014, they identified it as the most important. It's mentioned. It is mentioned in the coalition agreement, and we expect that it will be processed in the Cabinet of Ministers and will come to the Parliament. One more important legislation on accounting chamber. It was brought in by the President of Ukraine to the Parliament of Ukraine. It is one which will be considered this week. It cannot be. The draft law was. It was supported by World Bank and European experts. There were a lot of calls, conversations, meetings, and a lot of discussions. The project considers international standards of foreign audit, of international audit, and of state finances at the best practice of European countries. I'm trying to give you a digest now. On the 9th of February, we finished the competition for, or let's say, stopped receiving documents for the head of reforms committee, and it was in cooperation with EBRD. We expected more than 70 applications to hold that position, and the competition will be over by February 20. The final competition commission includes 7 people from ABRD and 3 from executive committee, Anna Obko, Alexander Mushis, and myself. Now, about some projects which are in force, and or we have them. There will be a delegation of Ukraine to negotiate with EBRD, international EBRD, as to a new agreement, and the agreement includes 200 means $215 million, and that includes healthcare. Also, we have negotiations with, and at the request of the President, Minister of Economy, Mr. Abramovich, and the Ambassador of Japan, signed an agreement to protect investments, and that's a part of the project between Ukraine and Japan. And Japan invested in our economy more than 170 million. We continue cooperation with IMF, and as you know, because in the memorandum and during negotiations with IMF, there are a lot of reforms are mentioned, reforms in energy sector and financial sector, regulation of many issues, social, economic, and financial. New program is developed for 4 years because negotiations are quite difficult, and 24 hours a day. The mission continues its work until February 11. This is probably everything. This is an outline, so this is a small list of latest developments. I'm ready to answer your questions. Kyiv News, Oleg Polivanov. E-system of IDPs, to register them, for them to use, for us to have understanding of where they are, what they do, how they will participate in local elections, As far as I remember, the Prime Minister asked to develop such a system, but I don't have information about that. Dmytro, reform in the banking system has taken place under the pressure of the World Bank. We reduced the number of banks, and we will continue of reducing the number. By law, rights of owners of banks are protected by our legislation. Rights of those who lost their money in those banks are not protected. I lost a lot of my savings in 10 years in VIB Bank. Mr. Bakhmutil, owner of that bank, he is the biggest landowner in Ukraine. He has lots of factories and ships, as they say. So the question is there any reform? Will there be any reform which will protect my rights, and how the state will return my money to me if it destroyed these banks? Because I cannot appeal to the prosecution, to the court, because everything is stopped to those banks. Is it normal in this country that they take money from people on the run? So laws defend big business. Let me try to answer. There's legislation which regulates that issue as to fund to guarantee savings. I understand you, but if you look at liquidation of Nadra Bank, which took place last week, and the bank was taken out from a banking system of Ukraine.
99% of the deposits which were in this bank, they are guaranteed by the fund of guaranteeing the deposits. Definitely 1% is left of the deposits which exceed the amount defined by the legislation. Talking about legislative initiatives related to responsibility of persons related to the bank at 1033, the law was voted for, number 2085. 242 MPs were for it, and that is the law on introducing amendments to the laws of Ukraine, and that's related to banks and responsibility of the persons related to the banks. And I will not talk about details. The draft law was that law was drafted by representatives of my team and the team of experts. So I can tell you that that is one of the requirements of international creditors of Ukraine, such law. Can you, Wall Street Journal, can you please tell about the progress in negotiations on donor conference on Donbass? The meeting of the Executive Committee on Reforms will take place tomorrow, and that's where we will be discussing with Ivaras and Ganna the status of donor conference. We are planning to have this conference, and Ivaras is planning to make the presentation at the National Council on Reforms, and he will talk about what's needed. The Cabinet of Ministers is working on developing specific projects which will be presented at the donor conference. Talking to the Minister of Agricultural Sector, I can tell you that they have very serious portfolio of proposals on investments or attracting donors. I am sure that in the end of this week you will get more detailed information about donor conference. Could you please explain what is the status with project managers who are selected? I do not understand what's their status, what are their powers. Again, the ministries and ministers are to be responsible for reforms. On the other hand, we'll have project managers. What will be their zone of responsibility? Who will be responsible for reforms and who will have powers? Thank you for the question. Then I will go back again to the model of management, which is around reforms today, and answering the question why we needed the National Council of Reforms. We needed it as a platform. The subjects of initiatives are the President, the Cabinet of Ministers, Verkhovna Rada, NGOs, experts, all have their own points of view. Now we have from 3 to 6 different points of view related to each reform. The history around the Anti-Corruption Bureau, what's happening around the Anti-Corruption Bureau. There were 6 groups with different ideas during quite a lengthy process into which we and the representatives of presidential administration were involved to mediate the process. We arrived at one draft law that was submitted. Despite that, at night the MPs sent it back. And there is the similar situation with the judicial reform. There are 2 points of view, but they are being merged now. So we have a big requirement in having one single platform around which certain ideas on reforms will be developed and decisions will be made. The minister is responsible for every reform, but if you look at the schedule of the minister and how much time can the minister allocate to reforms, especially in this very difficult situation, this will be a small percentage. As a rule, this is delegated to the deputy or someone who the ministers are looking for. They're looking now for candidates to the positions of deputy ministers. There are different points of view, different ideas related to reforms, and the different alternatives are to be considered. And the role of the project manager is to ensure that every week a working group on reforms produces some result related to each reform. And that is the responsibility of project manager. He does not replace the responsibility of the minister, of the head of the working group on reforms. But he ensures that there's the result and there's the progress, that there are certain milestones of the reforms, that these milestones are achieved and they are not changed. And that is the task of the project manager. Talking about powers, the project managers, they are non-governmental structure. That's the help, assistance to ministers, but what the project managers are doing, and this is like a working group developed some draft law, or maybe there's a conflict and it is considered at the executive committee. Then about IMF, you are saying that the negotiations are very tense. The mission has been extended till the 11th of February. That's not the first extension of the mission. There are many issues there. And the question is, what are the main issues discussed? And are you sure that till the 11th of February all the problems will be resolved? It's not up to me to disclose the negotiation process. It's very complicated. There are points of view of IMF, of the Ukrainian government, and they're looking for compromise. There's a discussion going on. I will not tell you about all the details of the discussion, I'm sure, knowing the level of responsibility of the Ministry of Finance, first of all, because they are the leaders of negotiation process. I'm sure that we will achieve agreement. Any other questions to our speakers? No more questions. Thank you, Dmytro. The next update will be next Tuesday. Take care. As of now, the briefings are over.